What if the place you chose for peace was guarding a secret that would shatter everything you thought you knew? For Navy SEAL Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hale, the crumbling lighthouse on the edge of Naval Air Station Oceana wasn't supposed to be anything more than a weekend restoration project, a chance to work with his hands, a way to quiet the noise in his head. But his K-9 partner, Odin, a black German shepherd with the instincts of a warrior and the loyalty of a brother, wouldn't stop digging at the old foundation. What started as a simple obsession would uncover a burial site that would force an entire naval base into lockdown and rewrite the rules of engagement for an invisible war. Before we begin, tell us where you're watching from, and if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The Virginia coast in early November was a study in gray. Gray sky, gray water, gray gulls wheeling over the Atlantic like scattered ash. The wind carried the sharp bite of salt and the distant thunder of FA-18s launching from the Naval Air Station 3 miles inland. Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hale stood at the base of the old Cape Morgan Lighthouse, a structure that hadn't guided ships in 40 years. At 34, Marcus was what the Navy called mid-career. 13 years as a SEAL, 6 deployments, 3 Purple Hearts he never wore, and a chest full of commendations that meant less to him than the silence he was desperately trying to find. He was 6'2", lean and hard as driftwood, with close-cropped dark hair going silver at the temples and eyes the color of storm water. The last deployment, 8 months in the Horn of Africa tracking down a terrorist cell, had ended with an ambush that killed 2 of his teammates. The after-action report called it unavoidable contact. Marcus called it what it was, a failure of intelligence that cost him his brothers. He'd been back stateside for 6 weeks, cleared for duty, psychologically fit, ready to lead again. All lies he told convincingly. At his feet, sitting in perfect disciplined alignment, was Odin. The 4-year-old German shepherd was pure black except for a small patch of tan on his chest, a birthmark that looked like a shield. He was 95 pounds of muscle, intelligence, and battle-tested courage. Odin had been with Marcus for 3 years. They'd cleared compounds together, tracked high-value targets through mountain passes, and once, in a firefight outside Mogadishu, Odin had taken down an insurgent who'd gotten the drop on Marcus. Marcus owed his life to this dog, and Odin, in turn, had never left his side. The lighthouse had been Marcus's grandfather's project, a restoration effort that the old man had started 20 years ago and never finished before he died. When the base commander offered Marcus the chance to take it over, get your hands dirty, clear your head, Hale, he'd accepted. It was something. It was better than sitting in his apartment staring at walls. The structure itself was magnificent in its decay. The keeper's cottage was a 2-story stone building with a slate roof that had more holes than shingles. The lighthouse tower rose 60 feet, its white paint peeling away to reveal the gray brick beneath, like skin sloughing off a corpse. It sat on a rocky promontory that jutted into the Atlantic, technically part of the air station's perimeter, but isolated enough to feel like another world. Marcus breathed in the cold, clean air. For the first time in weeks, the constant hum of adrenaline in his veins began to quiet. This place had no ghosts, no memory of blood or fire, just wind and stone and the eternal patience of the sea. "All right, Odin," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "Let's see what we're working with." Odin rose fluidly, his dark eyes scanning the perimeter with the professional focus that never quite turned off. Even here, even in peace, he was on patrol. They walked the property together, Marcus making mental notes of what needed immediate attention: the collapsed section of the seawall, the rotted porch boards, the rusted hinges on the lighthouse door. Odin moved ahead, nose to the ground, cataloging scents with the precision of a sensor array. It was in this quiet, windswept moment, with nothing but the cry of gulls and the boom of distant waves, that Marcus Hale felt something he hadn't felt in months: the faint, fragile possibility of healing. He had no idea that in 72 hours that possibility would be shattered by a truth that had been buried for decades, waiting for the right dog to find it. The victim in this story wasn't a person. It was the truth itself, and the 12 men whose names had been erased from every official record, men who had served their country and been betrayed by it, men whose bones had been lying beneath the lighthouse for 53 years. But Marcus didn't know that yet. What he knew was that the base was changing. Naval Air Station Oceana was one of the largest naval air bases on the East Coast, home to multiple fighter squadrons, thousands of personnel, and more classified operations than Marcus had clearance to know about. In the past year, there had been a quiet, unsettling shift. New security protocols, encrypted communications that bypassed normal channels. Civilian contractors with Department of Defense badges who wouldn't make eye contact. Something was happening. Something big. Marcus's commanding officer, Captain Raymond Voss, was a career pilot with 30 years in the Navy and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite by someone in a bad mood. Voss was old school. He believed in chain of command, mission focus, and never asking questions above your pay grade. 2 weeks ago, Voss had called Marcus into his office. "You're doing good work out at that lighthouse, Hale," Voss had said, not looking up from the paperwork on his desk. "Keep at it. Stay out there as much as you need. Take your time." It wasn't encouragement. It was an order disguised as kindness. Marcus was being benched. Not officially. Not in any way that would show up on his record. But he was being kept away from operations, away from briefings, away from anything that mattered. He should have been angry. Instead, he felt only a dull, exhausted relief. The lighthouse became his refuge. Every weekend, and most evenings after his meaningless administrative shifts, Marcus would drive the 15 minutes from base housing to the crumbling structure on the coast. He'd work until his hands bled, until his muscles screamed, until the physical exhaustion drowned out the noise in his head. Odin, ever loyal, stayed with him. The dog seemed to understand that this was healing work. He would patrol the perimeter, chase gulls, and occasionally bring Marcus a piece of driftwood as if to say, "We're building something here. We're fixing what's broken." But on the third weekend, something changed. Odin stopped playing, stopped patrolling. He became fixated on a section of the foundation on the north side of the keeper's cottage, the side that faced away from the ocean toward the dense scrub pine forest that marked the edge of the base's property. At first, Marcus thought it was an animal. A rabbit burrow, maybe a fox den. Odin had always had a prey drive, though his training kept it in check. But this wasn't prey drive. This was his alert behavior. Odin would sit in front of one particular section of the stone foundation, his body rigid, his ears forward, and he would stare. Just stare. And when Marcus would call him away, Odin would comply, but his eyes would track back to that spot, again and again, like a compass needle finding north. "What is it, boy?" Marcus asked, kneeling beside him on the cold ground. "What do you smell?" Odin whined, a soft, frustrated sound. He pawed gently at the base of the foundation, then looked up at Marcus with an expression that was unmistakable. "You need to pay attention. This matters." Marcus ran his hand over the stones. They were old, moss-covered, unremarkable. He saw nothing, smelled nothing, but he'd learned a long time ago to trust his dog over his own senses. "Okay," Marcus said quietly. "I hear you. We'll figure it out." He didn't know it yet, but Odin had just detected the faint chemical signature of human remains, specifically the breakdown compounds from bone that had been sealed in a concrete vault for over half a century. The scent was impossibly faint, barely detectable even to Odin's extraordinary nose, but it was there. And Odin, trained to find the dead in collapsed buildings and mass graves, had found them again. The antagonists in this story weren't obvious. They didn't arrive with guns or threats. They arrived with smiles, badges, and the quiet authority of men who believed they were protecting something greater than the truth. It started on Monday morning, when Marcus returned to the lighthouse to find a black SUV parked on the access road. Two men stood near the keeper's cottage, both in dark suits despite the coastal chill. One was tall and thin, with wire-rimmed glasses and the careful posture of a man who'd spent his life behind a desk. The other was shorter, broader, with the flat, assessing eyes of someone who'd seen combat. Marcus felt Odin tense beside him. The dog didn't growl. He was too disciplined for that. But his focus sharpened, his body coiling like a spring. "Lieutenant Commander Hale," the taller man called out, his voice carrying easily over the wind. "I'm Dr. Kenneth Winters, Naval Historical Preservation Office. This is my associate, Mr. Garrett." Marcus approached slowly, his hand resting lightly on Odin's head. "Doctor, can I help you?" Winters smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "We're conducting a survey of historical naval properties in the region. The Cape Morgan Lighthouse is on our list. We understand you've been doing some restoration work here." "Personal project," Marcus said carefully. "My grandfather started it. I'm finishing what he began." "Admirable," Winters said. "We'd like to conduct our own assessment, just routine. We'll need access to the property for the next few weeks. Shouldn't interfere with your work." It wasn't a request. Marcus's instincts, honed by years of operations, were screaming. What kind of assessment? Structural integrity, historical significance, environmental impact? Winters said smoothly. "Standard protocol." Mr. Garrett hadn't said a word. He was watching Odin with the focused intensity of someone evaluating a threat. His jacket hung in a way that suggested a shoulder holster. "I'll need to clear that with Captain Voss," Marcus said. "Already done," Winters replied. "Your CO is fully briefed. In fact, he suggested we coordinate directly with you. Professional courtesy." That was when Marcus knew something was wrong. Voss didn't do professional courtesy. He gave orders, or he gave silence. This coordination, this civilian presence, this sudden interest in a forgotten lighthouse was wrong. "Understood," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. "When do you want to start?" "Tomorrow morning, 0600, Winters said. "We'll bring a team. Ground-penetrating radar, structural engineers, the usual. Please ensure the site is accessible." "Will do." Winters handed him a business card. It had a Department of Defense seal, a phone number, and nothing else. No office address, no email, just a number. As the two men walked back to their SUV, Marcus watched them carefully. Garrett glanced back once, his eyes locking onto Odin, and for just a moment, Marcus saw something flicker across his face. Fear? No. Recognition. The SUV drove away, kicking up dust from the gravel road. Marcus looked down at Odin. The dog was still staring at the spot where Garrett had stood, a low, barely audible rumble in his chest. "Yeah," Marcus murmured. "I don't like them either." He walked over to the section of the foundation where Odin had been fixated for the past 3 days. He knelt, pressing his hand against the cold stone, and for the first time, he asked himself the question that would change everything. What are they really looking for? And why now, after 50 years, do they suddenly care about this place? That night, Marcus couldn't sleep. He lay in his bunk, staring at the ceiling, while Odin paced restlessly beside the bed. The dog's anxiety was contagious, bleeding into the room like smoke. At 0300, Marcus gave up. He got dressed, clipped Odin's lead, and drove back to the lighthouse. If they were coming at dawn, he wanted to know what he was dealing with. He had no idea that by sunrise, his entire world would be turned inside out, and the secret buried beneath the stones would force him to choose between his career and the truth. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The pre-dawn darkness at the lighthouse was absolute. No moon, no stars, just the rhythmic pulse of the Atlantic against the rocks below, and the distant wink of navigation lights from ships passing offshore. Marcus approached the keeper's cottage on foot, his tactical flashlight dark, moving by memory and instinct. Odin was at his heel, silent as smoke, his ears swiveling to catch every sound. They'd parked a quarter-mile back on the access road hidden in the tree line. Something was wrong. Marcus could feel it the way he'd felt ambushes in Afghanistan, a pressure in the air, a wrongness that had no name but absolute certainty. The foundation. He had to see the foundation before they arrived. He moved around the north side of the cottage, Odin pressed close to his leg. The dog's body language had changed completely. His head was low, his movements cautious. This was his tactical approach, the way he moved through hostile territory. Marcus knelt at the section of stones where Odin had been fixated. He pulled out a small utility knife and began to probe the mortar between the rocks. It was old, crumbling easily under the blade. Too easily. He worked the knife deeper, and suddenly the blade punched through into empty space. His heart kicked into overdrive. He scraped away more of the false mortar. It wasn't mortar at all, but some kind of plaster compound colored to match. Within minutes, he'd cleared away enough to reveal what had been hidden. A gap in the foundation, a seam where stones had been carefully removed and replaced. Behind them was darkness, a void, a space that shouldn't exist. Odin pushed his nose into the gap and inhaled deeply. When he pulled back, he let out a low, mournful whine that Marcus had only heard once before, in a mass grave outside Kandahar. "Oh, God," Marcus whispered. He was reaching for his phone to call Captain Voss when Odin's head snapped up, his ears pinned forward. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Headlights, multiple vehicles approaching fast. Marcus checked his watch. 045. They were over an hour early. He killed his flashlight and moved quickly into the shadow of the cottage, Odin beside him. 3 vehicles, 2 black SUVs and a white cargo van, came bouncing up the rutted access road, their high beams cutting through the darkness like searchlights. They weren't here for a survey. This was a tactical insertion. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The vehicle stopped in a loose perimeter around the cottage. Doors opened. 8 men emerged, all wearing dark tactical gear, load-bearing vests, and carrying equipment cases. No uniforms, no insignia, no identification. Dr. Winters stepped out of the lead SUV, now dressed in khakis and a black tactical jacket. The desk man was gone. In his place was an operator. "Set up the GPR on the North Foundation," he ordered, his voice sharp and military. "I want that wall imaged in 10 minutes. Garrett, get the excavation tools. If it's here, we pull it out and sanitize the site before sunrise." Sanitize. Marcus felt ice water flood his veins. This wasn't a historical survey. This was a cover-up. They were here to remove evidence, to erase whatever was buried beneath those stones. Garrett, the quiet man from yesterday, moved to the back of the van and began unloading shovels, pry bars, and something that looked disturbingly like body bags. Marcus's mind raced. He should call this in. He should contact Voss, base security, someone with authority. But his phone had no signal out here. It never did. And even if it did, who would he call? Winters had said Voss was briefed. Was his own commanding officer part of this? The team moved with efficient, practiced precision. 2 men set up portable floodlights. Another rolled what looked like a ground-penetrating radar unit toward the North Foundation, toward the exact spot Marcus had just opened. One of the men, younger than the others, knelt by the stones and immediately saw the disturbed mortar, the fresh scrape marks from Marcus's knife. "Sir," he called out, "someone's been here, recent, last few hours." Every head turned. Winters walked over, his face hardening as he examined the evidence. He pulled a radio from his belt. "Delta 6, this is Winters. We have a compromise. Repeat, site is compromised. Unknown party has accessed the primary location." A crackling voice responded, "Copy. Proceed with extraction. Authorize full sanitization protocol." Winters looked up, scanning the darkness around the cottage. "Garrett, take 2 men. Sweep the perimeter. Find who was here. I want them identified and contained before we move forward." Contained. Not questioned. Not detained. Contained. Marcus's hand dropped to his hip where his service weapon should have been, but he wasn't armed. He was in civilian clothes, out here on personal time with nothing but a utility knife and his dog. And he had just witnessed what was unmistakably an illegal operation on federal property. He had 2 choices: disappear into the darkness, call for help from somewhere with signal, and hope the evidence wasn't destroyed before he could bring in the authorities. Or stay, document what he could, and risk being contained by men who clearly had no intention of leaving witnesses. Odin pressed against his leg, a warm, solid presence. The dog's eyes were locked on Garrett, who was now moving toward the tree line with 2 armed men, their weapon-mounted lights cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. They were being hunted. Marcus made his decision. He wasn't running. Not from this. Not when 12 men, he was certain now there were 12, just like in the old photo his grandfather had kept, the one of the Lighthouse crew that had vanished in 1970, were lying beneath those stones, erased from history. He pulled out his phone, switched it to video, and began recording. No audio, just visual. The floodlights, the equipment, the faces, Winters giving orders, the body bags being unloaded, evidence. Odin's growl deepened. The sweep team was 50 feet away, moving methodically through the scrub brush, their lights probing every shadow. Marcus had maybe 30 seconds before they found him. He did the only thing he could. He stepped out of the shadows, Odin at his side, and walked directly into the floodlights. "Dr. Winters," he called out, his voice carrying over the sound of generators and ocean wind. "I think we need to talk about what you're really doing here." Every weapon in the compound swung toward him. 8 men, 8 rifles, all trained on a lone SEAL and his dog. Winter's face went pale, then red, then settled into something cold and dead. "Lieutenant Commander Hale," he said quietly, "you've made a terrible mistake." Marcus stood in the harsh glare of the floodlights, acutely aware of the 8 rifles aimed at his chest. Odin was a coiled spring beside him, every muscle tensed, waiting for the command that would turn him from companion into weapon. But Marcus's voice, when he spoke, was calm, conversational, the voice of a man who'd had guns pointed at him in a dozen countries and had learned that the first person to panic was usually the first person to die. 8 armed men on federal property, Marcus said, his eyes locked on Winters. No visible identification, no authorization from base security, excavation equipment and what looked like body bags. He tilted his head slightly. Naval Historical Preservation Office doesn't usually roll that deep, Doctor. Winters stepped forward, his hand raised in a placating gesture. "Lieutenant Commander, you're making assumptions based on incomplete information. Lower your phone. Let's discuss this rationally." Marcus didn't lower his phone. The video was still recording. The lens pointed directly at Winters and his team. "Here's what I know," Marcus continued, his tone still eerily calm. "My dog, a military working dog trained in cadaver detection, has been alerting on this foundation for 3 days. I opened that wall an hour ago. There's a void behind those stones and it smells like death. Old death. And now you're here, before sunrise, with enough gear to remove evidence and sanitize a crime scene." "There is no crime scene," Winters said, his voice hardening. "This is a classified recovery operation. You've stumbled into something above your clearance level, Lieutenant Commander. The smart thing to do is walk away. Can't do that, then you're forcing my hand." Garrett and the 2 sweep team members emerged from the tree line behind Marcus, boxing him in. He was surrounded, but he'd been surrounded before. "Odin," Marcus said quietly, not taking his eyes off Winters. "Watch." The German shepherd shifted position, his body now angled to keep both Winters and Garrett in his line of sight. His lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that had been trained to disable armed combatants. The tactical situation was clear to everyone present. If shooting started, Marcus would die. But Odin would take at least 2 of them down before he was stopped, and in the chaos, that phone recording might survive. Winters understood the calculation. His jaw clenched. "Lieutenant Commander Hale, I am acting under the authority of a classified defense intelligence directive. What is buried in that foundation is a matter of national security. The men in that wall died serving their country. They were erased for a reason. That reason is still classified, still active, still necessary." Marcus felt something crack open inside his chest. "There are men in that wall. 12 men," Winters said quietly, "killed in 1970 during a classified operation that went catastrophically wrong. They were buried here because their existence compromised an intelligence asset that is still operational today. Their families were told they died in training accidents. Scattered burials across 6 states, closed caskets. This location was never supposed to be disturbed. And my grandfather?" Marcus's voice was suddenly rough. "He started restoring this place 20 years ago. Did you stop him too?" Winters's silence was answer enough. The pieces fell into place with horrible clarity. His grandfather's sudden heart attack while working at the Lighthouse. The restoration project abandoned overnight. The property sealed and forgotten. "You killed him," Marcus whispered. "He was warned," Winters said flatly. "He didn't listen. He kept digging. We couldn't allow the site to be compromised." Red rage flooded Marcus's vision. His hand clenched on his phone so hard the case cracked. Odin sensed the shift in his handler's emotion and let out a sharp, aggressive bark, a warning to everyone present that the situation was seconds from detonating. "Easy, Hale," Garrett said from behind him, his voice low and professional. Former Special Operations, Marcus could hear it in his tone. "Think about your career. Think about your team. Walk away from this. The men in that wall are gone. They can't be saved. But you can still have a future." Marcus's mind was moving at light speed, tactical assessment overriding emotion. He was outnumbered, outgunned, and standing in an isolated location with no witnesses and no backup. If they wanted him contained, this was the perfect place to do it. But they hadn't pulled the triggers yet, which meant they still wanted this clean. They wanted him to walk away, to forget what he'd seen. "Here's the problem," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a deadly quiet. "My dog knows, and once a K9 alerts on human remains, it's logged. His training records, his alerts, they're all documented. I can walk away, but Odin's alert is already in the system. Base veterinary services, training logs, everything. You can bury this site, but you can't bury the data." It was a bluff. He hadn't logged anything officially, but Winters didn't know that. Winters's eyes narrowed. "Then we'll need to recalibrate our approach." He nodded to Garrett. Two things happened simultaneously. Garrett's hand went to his sidearm, and Odin exploded into motion. The dog launched himself at Garrett with terrifying speed, 85 pounds of muscle and fury covering 15 feet in less than 2 seconds. He hit Garrett in the chest, jaws clamping onto the man's weapon arm before the gun could clear the holster. And in the chaos, Marcus ran. Not away. Toward the foundation. Toward the truth. Marcus covered the 30 feet to the north foundation in a dead sprint, his boots skidding on loose gravel. Behind him, shouts erupted. Garrett screaming as Odin's jaws locked onto his arm, Winters yelling orders, the sweep team scrambling to respond without shooting the dog and risking hitting their own man. Marcus hit the foundation wall at full speed, dropping to his knees beside the gap he'd opened earlier. He grabbed the loosened stones and ripped them away with his bare hands, the old plaster crumbling, his fingers immediately bleeding as the rough edges tore his skin. "Odin! Out! Here!" he roared. The command was absolute. Odin released Garrett instantly, whirled, and sprinted toward Marcus, his muzzle flecked with blood. The dog skidded to a stop beside him, positioning himself between Marcus and the 8 advancing men. Marcus pulled away the last of the false stones, revealing the void behind. He shone his phone's flashlight into the darkness. 12 skulls stared back at him from the black. They were arranged carefully, almost reverently, in 2 rows, still wearing the rotted remains of military uniforms. Dog tags glinted in the light, names still visible despite 50 years in the dark. Marcus's phone was recording everything. "Stand down, Hale!" Winters shouted, his voice ragged. "You don't understand what you're doing." Marcus stood slowly, turning to face them. His face was stone. His eyes were fire. "I understand perfectly," he said. "You buried 12 sailors and you've spent 50 years lying about it. You killed my grandfather when he got close to the truth, and you came here tonight to finish the cover-up." He held up his phone. "But it's too late. This video uploads to cloud storage in real time when I'm on base property, which I am. This lighthouse sits on NAS Oceania's eastern perimeter. Your classified operation. It's already documented, already distributed. You can shoot me. You can take my phone, but the evidence is already out there." Another bluff. His phone had no signal, but his voice carried absolute conviction. Winters's face went through a series of calculations. Marcus could see the man weighing options, measuring risks, trying to find an angle. "We can make you disappear, just like we made them disappear," Winters finally said, his voice cold. "You can try," Marcus replied. "But my CO knows I'm here. Base security knows I'm here, and my K9's alert is already logged with the working dog unit. You kill me, you'll have to kill everyone who knows. At some point, Dr. Winters, the cover-up costs more than the truth." Odin growled, low and continuous, his eyes locked on Garrett, who was clutching his bleeding arm. The standoff hung in the pre-dawn air, balanced on a knife's edge. And then, cutting through the tension like a gunshot, came a sound that changed everything. The distant wail of sirens. Multiple vehicles, approaching fast. Someone had called base security. The sirens were getting louder. Marcus counted at least 3 vehicles, maybe 4, racing down the access road toward the lighthouse. The early morning darkness was beginning to pale at the edges. Dawn was coming. Winter's face went from cold calculation to barely controlled rage. "Who did you call?" "I didn't," Marcus said honestly. Then he smiled, a hard, dangerous expression. "But somebody did." Garrett, still clutching his bleeding arm, stumbled backward toward the SUVs. "We need to abort, now. If base security finds us here." "Shut up," Winters snarled. He was unraveling. The perfect operation, the clean sanitization, all falling apart. His eyes locked onto Marcus with murderous intent. "You just signed your death warrant, Hale." "Get in line," Marcus said flatly. The lead vehicle, a base security Humvee with full light bar blazing, burst into the clearing. Behind it came 2 more security vehicles, and, impossibly, a black sedan with federal plates. Doors flew open. Armed base security officers emerged, weapons drawn, and from the federal sedan stepped a woman Marcus had never seen before. Mid-40s, dark hair pulled back severely, wearing a charcoal gray suit and an expression of absolute authority. She held up a badge that caught the floodlights. "Special Agent Diana Reeves, Naval Criminal Investigative Service." Her voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Nobody moves. Dr. Winters, you and your team are ordered to stand down immediately." Winters looked like he'd been punched. "This operation is classified DIA. You don't have jurisdiction. I have a federal warrant signed 2 hours ago by a JAG captain, based on evidence provided by Lieutenant Commander Hale's commanding officer." Reeves interrupted, striding forward. Captain Voss became concerned when he couldn't reach his officer and reviewed security footage showing your unauthorized early arrival. He contacted NCIS. "We've been listening to your entire conversation via Lieutenant Commander Hale's phone." Marcus felt his stomach drop. His phone. The call he thought had failed because of no signal. He pulled it from his pocket. The screen showed an active call. Duration, 43 minutes. He'd pocket-dialed someone during the confrontation. The call had connected to the last number in his recents. Captain Voss. His CO had heard everything. The threats, the confession about the 12 buried men. Winters's admission about Marcus's grandfather. Everything. Winters saw his entire world collapsing. His hand moved toward his sidearm. "Don't," Garrett said quietly, his good hand gripping Winters' shoulder. Blood dripped from his mangled arm. Odin had done serious damage. "It's over." But Winters wasn't listening. Marcus saw it in his eyes, the look of a man who'd already decided that prison was not an option. His hand dropped to his weapon. "Odin!" Marcus didn't give a command. He didn't need to. The German shepherd had been watching Winters with predatory focus, reading body language with the precision of a trained operator. The instant Winters' hand touched his holster, Odin moved. He crossed the distance in a blur of black fur and controlled violence. But he didn't go for Winters' weapon arm. He went low, hidden the man's legs in a tackle that would have made a linebacker proud. Winters went down hard, his head cracking against the gravel, his weapon spinning away unfired. Odin stood over him, paws planted on the man's chest, teeth inches from his throat, a growl like tearing metal rumbling from his chest. "Good boy," Marcus said quietly. "Hold." Base security swarmed Winters' team. Weapons were confiscated. Hands were zip-tied. The entire operation collapsed in less than 90 seconds. Agent Reeves walked over to Marcus, her expression unreadable. She looked down at Odin, still holding Winters pinned, then up at Marcus. "That's one hell of a dog, Lieutenant Commander. Best partner I ever had, ma'am. Captain Voss speaks highly of you. Says you're too stubborn to follow illegal orders and too smart to let bad men get away with murder." She paused. "I'm inclined to agree. Odin, release." Odin stepped off Winters immediately, returning to Marcus's side. His tail wagged once, the only sign of satisfaction. Security officers hauled Winters to his feet. His face was bloody from the fall, his eyes wild. "You don't understand what you've done. Those men in that wall, they compromised an asset that's kept this country safe for 50 years. Their sacrifice, their murder," Reeves corrected coldly. "There's a difference. And whatever they stumbled onto that got them killed, we're going to find it. You spent 50 years covering up a war crime, Doctor. That ends today." She turned to Marcus. "I'll need your full statement. Your phone as evidence, and your dog's training records." "Already prepared to cooperate, ma'am." Marcus hesitated. "My grandfather," Reeves's expression softened slightly. "James Hale. Yes, we pulled his file. Died of an acute cardiac event while working at this lighthouse 20 years ago. Coroner noted unusually high levels of potassium in his system, consistent with injection. No investigation was ever opened." She met Marcus's eyes. "We'll reopen it now. I can't give you justice for him yet, but I can promise you the truth." Marcus nodded, his throat too tight to speak. The sun was rising now, golden light spilling over the Atlantic, illuminating the lighthouse in shades of amber and hope. The structure that had been a tomb for 50 years was now a crime scene, cordoned off with yellow tape, swarming with federal investigators and NCIS forensic teams. Marcus stood at the edge of the perimeter, Odin sitting calmly beside him. The dog's alert, his obsessive, impossible-to-ignore alert, had brought this all crashing down. "He knew," Marcus said quietly, scratching behind Odin's ears. 3 days he tried to tell me. 3 days of digging and whining and staring at those stones. He knew they were there." Odin looked up at him with those intelligent dark eyes, and Marcus could swear the dog understood every word. "You're not just a good dog," Marcus murmured. "You're a witness. You spoke for 12 men who couldn't speak for themselves." Agent Reeves approached, 2 cups of coffee in her hands. She offered one to Marcus. "Thought you could use this." "Thank you, ma'am." They stood in silence for a moment, watching the sun climb higher. "Lieutenant Commander, I need to ask you something," Reeves said carefully. "When you opened that wall and saw what was inside, why didn't you run? Why didn't you call for backup and retreat to safety? You're trained for tactical situations. You knew you were outgunned." Marcus was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with emotion he'd been holding back for hours. "Because my grandfather died trying to bring them home. Because 12 sailors deserved better than to be erased and forgotten. And because," he looked down at Odin, "because my partner told me it mattered, and I trust him more than I trust orders." Reeves smiled, a real smile this time. "NCIS is going to need consultants on this case. You and your dog interested in some temporary additional duty?" Marcus met her eyes. For the first time in months, he felt something he thought he'd lost. Purpose. "We're in." By 0900, the Lighthouse site had been transformed into the largest active crime scene investigation in naval history. NCIS had brought in 3 mobile command units, a full forensic anthropology team from the Armed Forces Medical Examiner System, and enough federal agents to make the Coast Guard nervous. Marcus and Odin had been moved to one of the command units, a climate-controlled trailer that smelled of new electronics and strong coffee. Agent Reeves had set up a joint task force, and Marcus found himself sitting at a conference table across from people whose clearances were so high they didn't even have name tags. But he recognized one face immediately. Captain Raymond Voss, his commanding officer. The man who'd been keeping him benched. The man who'd apparently been protecting him. Voss sat down heavily, his granite face showing more emotion than Marcus had ever seen. "Sir," Marcus began, "You disobeyed my order to stay away from active ops," Voss interrupted. "You went to that lighthouse when I specifically told you to take your time. Stay out there, keep your head down." His expression cracked into something almost like pride. "And because you're too damn stubborn to follow good advice, you just broke open the biggest cover-up in modern naval history." "Sir, I didn't know. I know you didn't." Voss leaned forward. 20 years ago, I was a lieutenant commander like you. Your grandfather came to me with concerns about the lighthouse. He'd found something. Markings on the foundation stones, symbols that indicated a mass burial. I told him I'd look into it. Voss's voice went quiet. 2 days later, men in suits showed up at my office. DOD credentials. They explained that the lighthouse was part of a closed investigation, that James Hale was interfering with classified matters, and that I needed to keep my personnel away from the site. I was young. I followed orders. He looked directly at Marcus. 3 weeks later, your grandfather was dead. I knew. I couldn't prove it, but I knew. And I've spent 20 years making sure nobody else went near that property, including you. When you told me you wanted to finish his restoration project, I thought I could keep you safe by keeping you busy, keeping you isolated, making sure those same suits didn't notice you. But they did notice, Marcus said quietly. They noticed the moment you started digging, Voss confirmed. Winter's team has been monitoring the site for 50 years. They have seismic sensors buried around the perimeter. The second you disturbed that foundation, they knew. And they came to clean it up. Agent Reeves spoke up from the head of the table. What Captain Voss couldn't tell you, what even he didn't know until 6 hours ago, was that I've been investigating Dr. Kenneth Winters and his Historical Preservation Office for 2 years. It's not a preservation office. It's a sanitization unit. They eliminate evidence of classified operations that went wrong." She pulled up a digital file on the large monitor behind her. Photos appeared. Different locations, different burial sites, different crimes. Winters and his team have been operating since 1985. They answer to a shadow directive that was created during the Cold War to protect intelligence assets at any cost. Any cost, including murdering civilians who got too close to buried secrets. "How many?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. "We've identified 17 suspicious deaths over 40 years, Reeves said, "including your grandfather. Winters wasn't old enough to have killed the original 12 sailors in 1970, but he's been covering up the crime ever since. He was their successor, their guardian of secrets." A new voice spoke from the doorway. "Until a dog decided those secrets needed to come to light." Dr. Sarah Chen, the base's senior veterinary officer, entered carrying a tablet. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and an impatient demeanor that suggested she didn't suffer fools. "I pulled Odin's complete training and service records," Dr. Chen continued. "He's certified in explosive detection, cadaver recovery, and tactical operations. His olfactory sensitivity is in the 99th percentile. But what's extraordinary is this." She pulled up a training log. 3 years ago, Odin was part of a specialized program testing canine ability to detect century-old remains. Most dogs failed. Odin was one of only 2 in the program who succeeded. He can smell bone degradation through concrete and stone. She looked at Marcus. "When you brought him to that lighthouse, you didn't just bring a dog. You brought the one animal on the East Coast who could find 50-year-old bodies buried under a foundation. That's not luck, Lieutenant Commander. That's fate." Marcus reached down and rested his hand on Odin's head. The dog had been lying quietly under the table, patient as always, but at Marcus's touch, Odin's tail thumped against the floor. "Or maybe," Marcus said quietly, "he just knew what his job was. Find the dead, bring them home, no matter how long it takes." Agent Reeves stood. "Gentlemen, Dr. Chen, we have 12 sailors in that wall. They've been waiting 53 years for someone to speak their names. Lieutenant Commander Hale, would you like to be present when we bring them out?" Marcus stood immediately. "Yes, ma'am, we both would." The exhumation took 4 days. NCIS forensic teams worked with painstaking care, documenting every inch of the hidden chamber behind the foundation. What they found was both heartbreaking and enraging. The 12 sailors had been executed. Single gunshot wounds to the back of the head. Military precision. They'd been murdered, not killed in action. Their dog tags identified them. A mix of Navy intelligence specialists, cryptographers, and signals operators. All assigned to a classified listening station at the Lighthouse in 1970. All officially listed as killed in separate training accidents. All buried together in an unmarked grave, their families lied to for half a century. Marcus stood at the perimeter of the excavation site, Odin at his side, and watched as each set of remains was carefully removed, placed in a transfer case, and draped with an American flag. It was the dignity they should have received 53 years ago. Agent Reeves approached, her expression somber. "We identified the intelligence asset they discovered. It was a Soviet deep cover operative who'd infiltrated the Naval Cryptography Division. When these 12 sailors stumbled onto evidence of the spy, the decision was made at the highest levels to eliminate the threat quietly, which meant eliminating the witnesses. They killed our own people to protect a spy?" Marcus's voice was hollow. They killed our own people to protect the capture of the spy, Reeves corrected. The operative was turned, made into a double agent. He fed false intelligence to the Soviets for the next 20 years. The brass decided 12 lives were worth the strategic advantage. Who made that call? Men who are long dead, Reeves said. But the system that allowed it, that's still alive, and that's what we're going to dismantle. Dr. Chen emerged from the excavation site, pulling off latex gloves. She walked directly to Marcus and Odin. "I want to commend your K-9 officially," she said. "What he did here, detecting remains through stone, maintaining his alert for 3 days despite no handler acknowledgement, and ultimately refusing to leave the site. That's beyond training. That's instinct. That's knowing, at some primal level, that these men needed to be found." She knelt in front of Odin, looking the dog directly in the eyes. "Good boy," she said softly. "You're a very good boy. You brought them home." Odin's tail wagged slowly, and he leaned forward to lick her hand. Marcus felt something break loose in his chest. The grief he'd been carrying for months, the rage at the injustice, the weight of his own failures. It all came flooding out in a single moment of overwhelming emotion. He dropped to one knee beside Odin and wrapped his arms around the dog's neck, his face buried in black fur, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Odin didn't move. He stood steady and solid, bearing the weight of his handler's grief the way he'd borne everything else, with patience, loyalty, and unwavering presence. "Thank you," Marcus whispered. "Thank you for not giving up. Thank you for making me listen." Captain Voss watched from a distance, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "That," he said quietly to Agent Reeves, "is what it looks like when a warrior finally comes home from war. If this story has you on the edge of your seat, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss stories like this. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more incredible true stories of courage and loyalty." The exhumation was complete, but the investigation was just beginning. 3 days after the 12 sailors were recovered, Marcos was called to a secure briefing room in the NCIS building at Naval Station Norfolk. The room was designed to prevent any electronic surveillance. No windows, reinforced walls, white noise generators humming in the corners. Agent Reeves was there, along with Captain Voss, a Navy JAG officer Marcus didn't recognize, and 2 men in civilian suits who introduced themselves simply as Department of Defense Oversight. The atmosphere was heavy with the weight of secrets about to be revealed. "Lieutenant Commander Hale," Reeves began, "what we're about to share with you is classified top secret. You'll be required to sign additional NDAs. What you've uncovered goes beyond a simple cover-up. It's a systemic failure that's been perpetuated for over half a century." She pulled up a document on the secure monitor, a grainy photograph from 1970 showing the lighthouse and a group of young sailors standing in front of it. "Operation Night Watch," she continued, "established in 1968 as a signals intelligence station. These 12 men were monitoring Soviet submarine communications off the Atlantic coast. They were good at their job. Too good." The screen changed to show decoded transmissions, technical readouts, surveillance photos. In March of 1970, they intercepted something that wasn't supposed to exist. Communications from a Soviet submarine coordinating with someone on U.S. soil. Not just any someone, a highly placed naval intelligence officer, a mole. Marcus felt his stomach turn. "Who?" One of the DoD men spoke for the first time. His voice was flat, bureaucratic. Captain James Rutherford. At the time, he was the Deputy Director of Naval Cryptography. He had access to every classified communication system in the Atlantic Fleet. He'd been passing information to the Soviets for 6 years. The 12 sailors at the Lighthouse, Reeves continued, decoded enough of the transmissions to identify Rutherford. They reported it up the chain of command. And that's when everything went wrong. She paused, her expression dark. The report went to Admiral Harrison Vance, no relation to you, Lieutenant Commander, who was Rutherford's direct superior. Vance was the one who made the decision. Rather than arrest Rutherford and risk a public trial that would expose how deeply Soviet intelligence had penetrated the Navy, he decided to turn Rutherford into a controlled asset. Make him a double agent feeding false intelligence to Moscow. But that meant the 12 sailors who knew the truth had to be silenced. Marcus said, his voice hollow. Permanently, Reeves confirmed. Admiral Vance authorized a Black Ops team to eliminate them, make it look like a training accident. But the team was sloppy. Instead of staging separate incidents, they executed all 12 at once and buried them at the Lighthouse. Then they fabricated records showing the men had died in different accidents at different locations. Marcus looked at Captain Voss. You knew some of this. I knew there was a cover-up, Voss said heavily. I didn't know the scale. I didn't know about Rutherford or Admiral Vance. That was buried deeper than even classified records could reach. The JAG officer leaned forward. Here's where it gets worse, Lieutenant Commander. The shadow directive that created Dr. Winters's sanitization unit. It was signed by Admiral Vance in 1971 to ensure no evidence of the Night Watch killings ever surfaced. That directive has been renewed every 5 years by successive naval leadership, which means everyone at the 06 level and above has known at some level that we've been covering up the murder of our own sailors for over 50 years. The room went silent. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, white-hot and barely controlled. So everyone knew, everyone covered it up. For what? To protect a dead admiral's reputation? To protect the institution, one of the DOD men said coldly. The Navy could not afford the scandal. Not in 1970, not in 1990, not now. 12 dead sailors versus the operational integrity of the Atlantic Fleet. The calculus was clear. Marcus stood up so fast his chair toppled backward. Odin, who'd been lying quietly in the corner, leapt to his feet, sensing his handler's fury. The calculus was clear. Marcus's voice was lethal. 12 men murdered by their own command. My grandfather murdered for trying to bring them justice. And you're telling me the calculus was clear? Sit down, Lieutenant Commander, Voss said quietly. Sir, with respect, sit down. Marcus sat. His hands were shaking. Odin moved to his side, pressing against his leg. Agent Reeves waited until the tension subsided slightly. The reason we're telling you this, Lieutenant Commander, is because you forced a reckoning. Once NCIS opened this investigation, once the bodies were officially recovered, once Winters and his team were arrested, the cover-up became untenable. The story is going to come out, and when it does, it's going to shake the Navy to its foundations. Good, Marcus said flatly. What Agent Reeves is trying to say, Captain Voss interjected, is that you're going to be at the center of that storm, you and your dog. You're going to be called to testify before Congress. You're going to be interviewed by every news outlet in the country. Your face, your name, and Odin's story are going to become public. And there are people, powerful people, who are going to do everything they can to discredit you, to make this go away. Marcus looked at his commanding officer. Are you asking me to stay quiet, sir? I'm telling you what you're up against, Voss said, and I'm asking you if you're ready for that fight. Marcus reached down and rested his hand on Odin's head. The dog looked up at him with absolute trust. "These 12 sailors didn't get a choice," Marcus said quietly. "They did their duty, and they were murdered for it. My grandfather didn't get a choice. He tried to bring them justice, and he was murdered for it. So, no, Captain, I'm not staying quiet, and I'm not backing down." He looked directly at the DoD men. "You want to protect the institution? Then the institution needs to own what it did. Every lie, every murder, every year of cover-up. Because if we don't, then what the hell are we fighting for?" Agent Reeves smiled, a fierce, approving expression. "That's what I was hoping you'd say, because NCIS isn't backing down either. We're going to prosecute everyone involved in this conspiracy, no matter how high it goes." "How high does it go?" Marcus asked. Reeves's smile faded. "We're about to find out." Over the next 2 weeks, the investigation exploded into something far bigger than anyone had anticipated. NCIS, with Marcus and Odin as key witnesses, began systematically dismantling 50 years of lies. Winters, facing multiple murder charges and espionage charges, began cooperating in exchange for life in prison instead of execution. His testimony opened doors that had been sealed for decades. The shadow directive that created his unit. It had been signed not just by Admiral Vance, but renewed by 4 subsequent chiefs of naval operations. Each one had known about Night Watch. Each one had chosen to keep it buried. Marcus found himself working alongside Agent Reeves, effectively detached from his SEAL team and assigned to the Joint Task Force. He and Odin became an investigative team, using the dog's detection abilities to locate other potential burial sites connected to Winters's sanitization unit. They found 3 more. 16 additional victims over 40 years. Some were military. Some were civilian contractors. All had gotten too close to classified secrets that someone decided were worth killing for. But Odin's most important discovery came 2 weeks into the investigation. They were searching Dr. Winters's personal storage unit, a climate-controlled facility in Virginia Beach. The unit was packed with filing cabinets, old equipment, and boxes of documents that Winters had kept as insurance, evidence of every operation he'd ever conducted. Marcos was photographing documents while Odin did a routine sweep of the space. The dog had been trained to detect not just explosives and remains, but also electronic storage devices, hard drives, USB drives, anything that might contain data. Odin stopped in front of an old filing cabinet, sat, and stared at the bottom drawer. "You got something, boy?" Marcus asked, setting down his camera. Odin woofed softly, his signal for electronics. Marcus opened the drawer. It was empty except for a small metal box pushed all the way to the back. He pulled it out carefully. Inside were 3 USB drives, each labeled with a date and a code word, and a handwritten note. "If I go down, they all go down. Insurance. KW." "Agent Reeves," Marcus called out, "you need to see this." The USB drives contained everything. Recordings of conversations with high-ranking officials authorizing black operations. Financial records showing payments to assassins. Documents ordering the elimination of witnesses. Names, dates, evidence of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of Naval Command and the Department of Defense. It was the smoking gun that would bring down an empire of lies, but it also put a target on Marcus's back. 3 days after the drives were turned over to NCIS, Marcus was walking Odin near his apartment when the dog suddenly went rigid, his ears pinned forward. A black sedan was idling at the end of the block, same model as the vehicles Winter's team had used. Marcus's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. "Odin, Hale." The sedan's window rolled down. A man in a suit leaned out, older, gray-haired with the bearing of senior military. "Lieutenant Commander Hale," the man called out. "I'd like a word." "Identify yourself," Marcus said, his voice hard. "Rear Admiral Joseph Kane. I'm here unofficially. Alone. Just 5 minutes of your time." Marcus didn't move. "You're asking a lot, Admiral. Last time men in suits wanted a conversation, they tried to kill me. I'm not here to threaten you, son. I'm here to warn you." Caney opened the car door slowly, keeping his hands visible. "What you've uncovered, it's going to destroy careers, collapse operations, and create a crisis of confidence in naval leadership that we may not recover from. There are people who will do anything to prevent that. Let them try," Marcus said flatly. Caney smiled sadly. "You're brave, you're righteous, and you're going to get yourself killed if you're not careful. These aren't street thugs, Hale. These are people with resources, with training, with nothing left to lose." "Then maybe they shouldn't have murdered 12 sailors," Marcus replied. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment. "For what it's worth, I agree with you. What was done to those men was unconscionable. But the system that allowed it to happen, that system is bigger than you, bigger than me, bigger than NCIS. You're fighting a war you can't win." "I'm not trying to win," Marcus said. "I'm just trying to bring 12 men home and speak their names. If that destroys careers, if that collapses operations, if that creates a crisis, good. Maybe it's time." Caney looked at him with something like respect. "You remind me of myself 30 years ago, before I learned to compromise." He got back in his car. "Watch your 6, Lieutenant Commander, and keep that dog close. He's the only reason you're still alive." The sedan drove away. Marcus looked down at Odin. "We need better security." That night, Agent Reeves arranged for protective detail. 2 NCIS agents would be stationed outside Marcus's apartment 24/7. Base security increased patrols around his workplace, and Odin, already trained for protection, became even more vigilant. But Marcus knew the real protection wasn't the guards or the patrols. It was the truth itself. As long as the evidence was public, as long as the investigation continued, killing him would accomplish nothing. The 12 sailors from Night Watch were no longer buried and forgotten. Their names were known. Their story was being told. And that story, once released into the light, couldn't be buried again. The congressional hearing was scheduled for March 15th, 4 months after Odin first started digging at the Lighthouse Foundation. The Armed Services Committee had called a special session to investigate the Night Watch killings and the subsequent cover-up. Marcus was subpoenaed to testify. So was Agent Reeves, Captain Voss, and dozens of current and former naval officers. But the bombshell came 3 days before the hearing. The current Chief of Naval Operations, Admiral Richard Castellano, held a press conference. Marcus watched it live from the NCIS building, standing beside Agent Reeves with Odin lying at his feet. Admiral Castellano stood at a podium, flanked by flags, his face grave. 53 years ago, he began. 12 United States Navy sailors were murdered by their own command. They were killed for doing their duty, for discovering a traitor, for being loyal to their country. And for the past half-century, the United States Navy has lied about it. We lied to their families. We lied to the public. And we perpetuated a system that allowed those lies to continue. The press gallery erupted. Cameras flashed. reporters shouted questions. Castellano raised his hand for silence. I stand before you today to say, it ends now. As Chief of Naval Operations, I am formally apologizing to the families of the 12 Night Watch sailors. I am ordering a complete review of all black operations conducted between 1960 and the present. And I'm recommending to the Secretary of Defense that every officer who knew about this cover-up and failed to come forward be subject to court-martial proceedings. He paused, his voice dropping. This includes admirals. This includes my predecessors. This includes men I served with and respected. But the truth matters more than reputation. Justice matters more than convenience. And the lives of 12 sailors matter more than the institution that failed them. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, a weight he'd been carrying since the moment he opened that wall. Furthermore, Castellano continued, I'm announcing that the Cape Morgan Lighthouse will be restored and converted into a memorial for the Night Watch sailors. It will serve as a reminder of what happens when we prioritize secrecy over honor, when we choose institutional protection over individual justice. The Admiral looked directly into the camera. To the families of the 12 men we failed, I am sorry. Your loved ones were heroes. They will be honored as heroes. Their names will be spoken with reverence, and their sacrifice will never be forgotten again. He stepped away from the podium without taking questions. Agent Reeves turned to Marcus. He just ended his career. You realize that? Yeah, Marcus said quietly. But he did the right thing. Sometimes, Reeves said, the right thing costs everything. Marcus looked down at Odin, who was watching him with calm, intelligent eyes. Worth it, Marcus said. The congressional hearing was a reckoning. For 3 days, witnesses testified to 50 years of conspiracy, murder, and institutional betrayal. Dr. Kenneth Winters, in exchange for his cooperation, provided detailed testimony about every operation he'd conducted, every order he'd received, every official who'd signed off on sanitization protocols. 7 current and former admirals were implicated, 14 senior officers, multiple civilian contractors. The fallout was unprecedented. Criminal charges were filed. Retirements were forced. The shadow directive that created Winter's unit was formally dissolved, its creators exposed and disgraced. But the most powerful moment came on the final day of testimony when Marcus was called to the stand. He wore his dress uniform, every ribbon and medal in place. Odin, in a formal K9 vest, sat beside him. The committee had granted special permission for the dog to be present. Lieutenant Commander Hale, the committee chair began, you've been called a whistleblower, a hero, and by some, a traitor who exposed classified operations and endangered national security. How do you respond? Marcus looked at the crowded gallery, at the families of the 12 sailors sitting in the front row, at the cameras broadcasting this to the world. Senator, he said, his voice clear and steady, I'm none of those things. I'm just a SEAL who listened to his dog. Odin found 12 murdered sailors. He alerted me for 3 days straight, refusing to give up, refusing to let them stay buried. I didn't uncover a conspiracy. He did. I just had the sense to trust him. He looked down at Odin. Everything I know about loyalty, about duty, about never leaving a fallen brother behind, I learned from the men I served with and the dog sitting beside me. Odin doesn't understand classified operations or national security. He understands right and wrong. He smelled death, and he wouldn't rest until someone did something about it. Marcus's voice grew stronger. If that makes me a whistleblower, fine. If it makes me a traitor, so be it. But those 12 men deserved better than a secret grave and a lifetime of lies. And if exposing that truth damages the institution, then maybe the institution needed to be damaged. The gallery erupted in applause. The committee chair banged his gavel, but even he was nodding. The families of the 12 sailors were crying, clutching photographs of young men in uniform, men they'd been told had died in training accidents, men they could now finally grieve properly. After Marcus stepped down, the committee unanimously passed a resolution. The 12 Night Watch sailors would be awarded the Defense Intelligence Medal posthumously. Their records would be corrected to reflect their true cause of death, and their families would receive full military honors and benefits. It wasn't enough. It could never be enough. But it was justice. Finally. 6 months after the hearing, on a crisp October morning, the Cape Morgan Lighthouse stood transformed. The keeper's cottage had been fully restored, its stone walls cleaned and repointed, its windows gleaming, its roof sound. The lighthouse tower gleamed white against the blue sky, its light operational once again. But it wasn't guiding ships, it was honoring the dead. The dedication ceremony for the Night Watch Memorial drew hundreds. The 12 families were there. 3 generations gathered to finally honor men they'd lost before they were born. Naval leadership was there. The new CNO, Captain Voss, Agent Reeves, and dozens of officers who wanted to bear witness to the Navy's commitment to never letting this happen again. And at the center of it all stood Marcus Hale and Odin. The memorial itself was beautiful in its simplicity. 12 granite markers arranged in a semicircle around the lighthouse, each bearing a name, a rank, a date of birth and death, and a single line. Murdered for doing his duty, silenced but not forgotten. At the center was a bronze statue, a Navy sailor kneeling beside a German shepherd, the dog's paw raised in alert, the sailor's hand resting on the dog's head. The plaque beneath read, "To all who seek the truth, and to the loyal companions who help us find it." Marcus stood before the statue, his dress uniform crisp, his bearing perfect. Odin sat beside him, calm and dignified. One by one, the families approached. They shook Marcus's hand. They petted Odin, some crying, some smiling, all grateful. An elderly woman, the sister of one of the 12 sailors, knelt in front of Odin. She was 93, frail, but her eyes were sharp. "My brother was 22 when they killed him," she whispered to the dog. "I was 17. They told us it was an accident. I never believed them, but I was just a girl. Nobody listened." She placed both hands on Odin's face, looking into his dark eyes. "You listened," she said. "You found him. You brought him home. Thank you." Odin, perhaps sensing the weight of her grief, gently licked her hand. Marcus helped the woman to her feet. She gripped his arm with surprising strength. "Promise me something," she said. "Promise me you'll keep telling this story. Promise me my brother and the others won't be forgotten again." "I promise," Marcus said. "We both do." After the ceremony, after the crowds dispersed and the dignitaries left, Marcus and Odin walked alone to the foundation where it all began. The north wall where Odin had first alerted. The wall had been preserved as part of the memorial, the opening sealed behind glass with a small plaque explaining what had been found there. Marcus stood before it, his hand resting on Odin's head. "You saved them, boy," he said quietly. "You gave them their names back. You gave them honor. You did what I couldn't do for my own team, for my own brothers. You showed me that it's never too late to bring someone home." Odin looked up at him, tail wagging slowly. For the first time since returning from deployment, Marcus felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Peace, not the absence of pain, but the presence of purpose. The weight of his fallen teammates would always be with him, but it no longer crushed him, because Odin had taught him a fundamental truth. The dead are only forgotten if we choose to forget them. As long as someone remembers, as long as someone speaks their names, they're still with us. "Come on, partner," Marcus said. "Let's go home." They walked away from the lighthouse together, warrior and guardian, their bond unbreakable, their mission complete. But Marcus knew it wasn't really over. There would be more secrets to uncover, more truths to bring to light, more injustices to confront. And when that time came, he and Odin would be ready. What is the measure of loyalty? What is the weight of truth? For Marcus Hale and his K9 partner Odin, those questions were answered on a windswept coast, at a forgotten lighthouse, beneath stones that held a 53-year-old lie. The story of the Night Watch sailors reminds us of a hard truth. Institutions are made of people, and people can fail. They can choose convenience over courage. They can choose silence over justice. They can bury mistakes instead of owning them. But the story also reminds us of something more hopeful, that truth has a way of surfacing, that the buried don't stay buried forever, that sometimes all it takes is one persistent dog and one handler brave enough to listen. Marcus didn't start his journey as a whistleblower or a crusader. He started it as a broken warrior looking for peace, trying to rebuild a lighthouse as a way of rebuilding himself. He had no idea that beneath the stones lay a secret that would change everything. But Odin knew. With instincts honed by millions of years of evolution and sharpened by military training, he smelled death and refused to ignore it. He alerted for 3 days straight. He dug. He barked. He communicated the only way he could. This matters. Pay attention. They're here. And Marcus, a man trained to trust his partner above all else, listened. The bond between a warrior and their K9 is sacred. It's built on mutual dependence, shared trauma, and absolute trust. In combat, they protect each other. In peace, they heal each other. And sometimes, in moments of moral crisis, they save each other. Odin saved Marcus from a life of quiet despair by giving him a mission that mattered, and Marcus saved Odin's discovery from being dismissed as just another false alert, just another dog chasing shadows. Together, they brought 12 men home. Together, they forced a reckoning. Together, they proved that justice delayed is not justice denied, as long as someone is still willing to dig. The real heroes of this story aren't the investigators or the admirals who finally did the right thing. The real heroes are the 12 sailors who did their duty even when it cost them everything. They're the families who waited 53 years for answers. They're the grandfather who tried to bring them justice and paid with his life. And yes, they're the black German shepherd who wouldn't stop digging, and the SEAL who trusted him enough to uncover the truth. Today, the Cape Morgan Lighthouse stands as a memorial to honor and loyalty. Its light sweeps across the Atlantic every night, a beacon reminding us that darkness cannot last forever, that secrets cannot stay buried when good people refuse to look away. We ask you, what truths in your own life are worth digging for? What injustices are worth confronting? What bonds are worth honoring? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Tell us about a time when you trusted your instincts or trusted a loyal companion, and it led you to a truth that mattered. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one person, one dog, and one act of courage can change the world. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of honor, loyalty, and the unbreakable bonds between warriors and their partners. And if you believe that truth always finds a way to surface, no matter how deep it's buried, leave a comment below saying, "Truth matters." Thank you so much for watching until the end. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs to be reminded that heroes still exist. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and let us know in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Was it the K-9's loyalty, the SEAL's courage, or the moment justice was finally served? We read every comment. God bless, and see you in the next story.